you know that I never fall in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Which Side of History Making Mischief webinar, hosted by the Stanford University Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design. My name is Lisa K. Solomon. I am an author, educator, and designer in residence at the D.school, where I teach classes and run programs at the intersection of futures thinking and design. I am absolutely thrilled that so many of you are joining us from around the world, especially as we start to wind down 2020. I've been looking at the chat. I see Australia, India, Canada, Oregon, my hometown of Pennsylvania, Morocco, Lexington, Massachusetts. We are thrilled that you took time out to join us. At this point, we know no one is looking for another reason to be on Zoom, so we really appreciate your presence here with us today. In our time together, we're going to explore some of the themes related to the future and frontiers of design and the important intersections, opportunities, and responsibilities with regards to technology, which is having an increasing impact and influence on all of our lives, particularly in the last 10 months. We're going to hear from David Kelly, founder of the D.school, our creative director, Scott Dorley, and Carissa Carter, the director of teaching and learning, all of whom are celebrated authors and pioneers in the field. We're excited to share some of the work we've been doing at the D.school regarding creating radical access and agency to technology, and some important insights from a chapter that David, Carissa, and Scott recently wrote called Mischievous Materials for the recently published book, Which Side of History? How Technology is Reshaping Democracy and Our Lives, written and edited by Jim Steyer, founder and CEO of Common Sense Media. We're going to hear a little from Jim too, so get ready. This is going to be a fun and lively session. Well, there's no better person to start this conversation with than with David Kelly, founder of the D.school and the global innovation consulting firm IDEO, co-author of the best-selling book, Creative Confidence, which is the subject of David's TED Talk, which has over 5.5 million views at this point. David is a huge personal inspiration to me in my design journey. And David, I'm so delighted that you could join us today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm glad to be here.
Well, David, this is certainly a moment in time. You've been thinking about design for a long time. And what a wonderful way to start this conversation than just get some of your reflections on where design is today. Would love to hear your thoughts on this moment in time as it relates to design.
Yeah, well, yes, well, it's a difficult time for everybody. I see myself as the center of my little universe, and it seems particularly difficult to me, but I'm sure everybody feels exactly the same way. If you think about the way we do design, it's mostly most of the activities are like being out in the world and observing people and interviewing people and getting to know what's meaningful to people, which requires you to kind of get into their communities and have serendipitous meetings with them and like that. And that's just not happening. Also, we're big on prototyping, where we make things and then show them to people, and then and that interaction is more difficult, right? And certainly you've seen the iconic things of us around the D.school sitting around a whiteboard, and everybody's got Post-it notes, and we're all collaborating and trying to synthesize ideas that we've had, and that's also not happening. So if I had to say what's going on right now, it's not the same. But each of those things I just described, we're finding ways to have new tools and new skills in order to make that happen. So we have learned to interview online in a certain way, and in a new way, and then there's some advantages to that. And each of the things that we have been doing, we've learned how to join other communities online and try to make it meaningful.
Well, it's certainly, I agree. I mean, it's certainly been very, very different. And a lot of the things that make design special around that human connection and understanding and up close observation have been much more difficult and have challenged all of us to think differently about our design practices and how we engage and really create value in the world.
Right.
And at the same time, I can't help but feel that creative confidence and certainly what you've dedicated your career to and amplifying creative problem solving in the world has never been more important. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. I mean, I once heard you say that it was kind of your reason to be on this earth to help spread creative confidence in the world.
Yes, well, yes. So, I really think that people are wildly creative, and if we just remove some of the blocks in front of them, that will manifest in their lives in a very positive way. And we're convinced that that's happening in some of the work we do. But yeah, so but I do think being creative, being thinking in innovative ways is going to be particularly useful here. I'm encouraged we're turning the corner, and their vaccines seem to be real, and there's lots of, in case one of them doesn't work, we have other ones. And the time frame seems exciting. It feels, I can feel positive for the first time in a long time about that. And so when we come out of this, organizations that we like to, individuals, the students, and organizations that we like to help, I think it appears are going to look to us. If you want to, you know, think in unusual ways, this kind of human-centered approach, I think, if I can be, I don't want to be too Pollyanna, but I'm optimistic that we will have something to offer because we have this, we believe we're good at embracing ambiguity and coming up with new to the world ideas. We have a methodology for that I think is going to be useful. I believe that. We'll see.
I believe that too. I do. So, David, my last question for you is really building on the usefulness of being creative at this moment in time. I've always seen design as a practice of activating optimism. As you said, not Pollyanna, but optimism, real change.
Right.
And it certainly feels like we need that now. So we're at the end of 2020. It's been a long year, a hard year. And many of us are looking hopefully and optimistically towards 2021. So I'd love to just end by asking you, as you look towards this new year, what is making you feel optimistic?
Well, I'm certainly optimistic in the sense that, our profession is kind of like painting a picture of the future. That's kind of what we do. I remember you in a former job. That's really what you did. Anyways, but so that being able to kind of embrace a future that has some of these ideas in it that we've learned. I mean, we've learned quite a bit. Anytime you're in this kind of stressful, kind of like almost war-like setting, there's lots to learn. And so I'm looking forward to getting good at using a lot of the things that we've learned, in the new process, in the new near future. We look at now, near, and far, and we're talking about near now that we have to figure out what should happen. And so I'm optimistic, and design's been really expanding here, which is wonderful. We started out in my career, I only designed products, and then we moved to experiences and services, and now we're doing things, around social practice, and we're doing things, about helping with the ethics of a situation, which is way exciting, but also a long way from where we started. And so my excitement about the future is that we keep expanding our influence, and it looks like that's going to be the case in 2021 as well.
Well, that's a great place for us to end on. And thank you so much. What I love about design is that it really puts humans at the center. And as we think about, more people putting humans at the center of their choices, I think that's a good thing for a lot of us. So, David, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. All right. Well, we are going to get a chance now to hear from Jim Steyer. Stanford professor, founder, and CEO of Common Sense, which is a nonprofit that is focused on media, digital, and civics literacy for educators and parents. Jim couldn't join us live today, but we asked him to share more about his new book, Which Side of History, and the urgency of this moment in time for all of us to be more aware of how technology is influencing our lives. So without further ado, let's hear from Jim.
Hi, I'm Jim Steyer, the CEO and founder of Common Sense Media, and the author of the new book, Which Side of History? How Technology is Reshaping Democracy in Our Lives. It's a collection of essays from thought leaders from across the United States and from across industries who can help us redefine our relationship with technology. I'm really sorry that I cannot be able to be there today to join you and Lisa, Carissa, and Scott as they discuss their terrific essay from the book, which they wrote with my good friend David Kelly, and which explores the role of design in making technology work for everyone in our society. I'd like to take a moment to talk a bit about why I actually wrote this book, and also about the important efforts that we're doing at Common Sense Media to change the tech industry across the world for the better, particularly for kids and families, but really for all of us. Put simply, we are at a pivotal moment in our nation's history, but also in our history of dealing with technology in all of our lives. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has created a deeper dependency on technology to keep us connected. But there are real costs. I know that as a parent. I know that as a Stanford professor. I know that as a citizen. I mean, think about it. We're all using technology for work, for education, for healthcare, for essential services, and for a lot of entertainment. But at the same time, technology has been used to spread misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, bad messages to kids and families, and bottom line, a lot of things that are threatening to free and open democracies. It's also clear that technology is widening the gap between rich and poor. It also taxes our mental health for kids, for families, for all of us. And it's also exacerbating inequality by, in many cases, leaving behind the underserved and the underconnected. That's the digital divide that we at Common Sense are so concerned about, and I'm sure that many of you today are concerned about. And those kind of harms have had a particularly devastating impact on kids. That's the focus of our work at Common Sense. But I think all of us need to be concerned about the impact of technology on kids. So if you think about design, as the folks here at the D.school better than anybody, it can be done to solve problems that emerge before any technology grows too powerful or has impacts that are too negatively consequential. Which Side of History is a template for trying to build a movement and creating an agenda for a positive technology agenda for the future, not just for the incoming Biden administration, but for all of us. And actually, the essays from Scott, Carissa, and David are perfectly on target to help us think this through. I think it's a pretty clear choice that all of us are going to have, and I hope that's a big part of the conversation that you have today. The question we really need to ask the leaders of these tech companies and ourselves in the room today, but going forward in the months and years ahead, is which side of history do we really want to be on? And which side of history are the tech companies and the folks who built these extraordinary platforms going to be looked back upon 50, 100 years from now when we survey the landscape that our children are inheriting from us? It's a pretty simple choice in my mind, and I hope you will agree with me on that. But I also hope you'll listen with Scott and Carissa and Lisa and engage in the discussion with them today and come back to all of us at Common Sense with your ideas about how to make technology the best possible element in a brighter future for all of us, particularly for our kids. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks so much for participating in Which Side of History. And I look forward to seeing you in person really soon. All the best, and thanks again.
Jim, thank you so much. Thank you for your work. Thank you for writing this book. It is extraordinary, and I'm going to hold it up here. And as Jim said, the range of essays are truly amazing, from Sacha Baron Cohen to Julie Whitcott-Haynes, Sherry Turkle, Tom Freeman, among others. So really encourage you to check it out, because I think what Tom says is that this is a moment for all of us to get actively involved, to make intentional choices about how we use technology, how we shape technology. And that's what we're going to continue to talk about. I could not be more delighted to invite my brilliant colleagues, Carissa Carter and Scott Dorley, to join me in furthering this conversation around the materials, around how we think about designing these technologies. And as Jim said, to try to get ahead of the problems before they emerge. So we're going to dive into some of the frameworks of that are in the chapter. And we encourage you in the chat to just share insights that pop up, maybe questions. We're using this as part of our learning journey. So please don't be shy in just sharing what resonates with you, what this brings up. So Carissa and Scott, thanks so much for joining.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Hi.
All right. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about which side of history. Jim put it out there. And I'm really excited to hear from your perspective what it was like to contribute a chapter to this important book. So
Yeah, I mean, I have to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Scott, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I do love the framing, like the idea of calling it Which Side of History to me is kind of a mischievous little title in itself. It kind of gets you to judge yourself right away. You know, what are the future folks going to think about us? What legacy are we leaving behind? And so it was just like an excellent prompt. I think the way we approached it was to kind of flip that around a little bit and start to think about like, well, which side of the future do we want to be on? There are multiple possibilities unfolding right now. And, you know, we're all responsible for them in some way or another. And so the design perspective to me and good design, I think is pretty idealistic. You know, we hope to make a current situation into a better one. So it feels like the real question at hand for us was, how do we want to affect the future if we can? And, you know, with a totally limited view and I think a good dose of humility, what can we do about it? How can each of us contribute to that future? So that's how we approached it.
I really appreciate that. And I also appreciate Jim's perspective and work on supporting our kids. I mean, in many ways, they are our future, right? They will continue to be. And so looking at this as an opportunity to reflect on design's ability to make choices, to shape, as you said, reframing really the future we want to be a part of, not just the history on the other side. Chris, I'd love to bring you in and talk about kind of design's evolution and trajectory within this moment. I know you think a lot about that.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I mean, let's talk for a second about what design work is, what it has been and what it is today and what it will be in the future. I think many of us, when we think design, we think about products, right? And those products can be physical things. They can be this, you know, iPhone that I'm holding in my hand, and they can also be digital things. So those apps on your phone are all digital products that have been designed, right? And each one of those products enable a certain number of experiences to happen. So the fact that I can go on this same phone and have a video call with my grandmother on the other side of the world, right? Like somebody has designed that experience. They've figured out the flow of how it's set up, how the screens are going to move, where those buttons are placed, right? And each one of these experiences is contained within some larger set of systems out there in the world. So if I keep with this example of my phone here, right? I am part of a few different systems with it. So one, if I want to get any kind of new app, right? I'm getting that from an app store. That is a system that has been designed both from the people that are creating and putting content on it, as well as those of us that are using and pulling stuff off of it. As an employee of Stanford, right? Like they're providing me with this phone in the plan. Like I am a cog in that system, right? Somebody had to design that, and these systems have to work together, right? And so I think a lot of us can understand as design as products, experiences, and systems, and that is a lot of how our discipline has evolved, right? But there's more than that, because there are the technologies that are embedded within all of our products, both the emerging ones, the standalone ones, that the ones that act exponentially, that affect the product. So for example, if I type in on a text message, right? Like if one of you were to type my name, Carissa, right? You're probably going to get like in autocorrect first, right? It's going to want to make it carrot, you know, and in you know, bad instances, sometimes it's carcass, right? But like, you know, and like we laugh or we cringe, right? Because the way that the technologies have been programmed, like they affect us as humans. They've been programmed by humans and they affect us as humans. And, you know, those technologies are all powered by the data that we use to inform them. So when on my phone, if I type my name, Carissa, like it no longer autocorrects, right? Because it has learned. There is a machine learning algorithm there that has learned that like, I fixed this enough, like this is how she wants it, right? And so there is all different types of data powering all different types of technologies. Like this is our responsibility as designers, is to consider not just the product's experiences and systems, but also the data and tech that power what we do. This is what design work is today. And it's really important to not forget that surrounding all of this is this layer of implication, right? So we cannot separate ourselves from the effect that our work has in the world. It's just not an option. So in the same way that we're prototyping new ideas of things that we want to make, movements we want to create, whatever it is you're making, you have to consider what could happen 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years in the future, right? What are the second and third order consequences of our work, both the positives and the negatives? And being able to prototype that now, you know, David mentioned prototyping in the beginning and making things, like that is tricky, but getting ourselves to envision the positive and the negative now, like that's more critical than ever. And that's part of what design work is.
Well, Carissa, you know, when I first saw this framework that you put out there, I mean, I've been thinking about design for almost 20 years. My head nearly fell off my body because I think it's such a beautiful encapsulation of the different levels that we need to be cognizant of, that we need to be intentional about as we make choices. And as we continue to try to be responsible in shaping the kind of future we want to bring to life, and not to be surprised by an implication that we didn't think through, having a better understanding of the connection between these layers and to embrace our responsibility, our agency to be able to bring them to life is so critical. So I'm just so grateful for the way we think about it. And I think it expands everyone's understanding that they are designers in this way. If they think about systems, if they are thinking about data collection and how it might ultimately lead to the development of a product that will have big implications in the long term.
I think you're like one last point there, Lisa. It's like everything is interconnected. Even if you consider yourself just a tech person, just a programmer, you're never just right? You're never just a UX designer, because what you make, right, is interconnected with all of these layers, no matter what.
Yeah. Scott, I want to bring you in here because I know you've been thinking about design across a number of different lenses, and would just love to hear your perspective on this framework and how it really, really amplifies the work that we need to be doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think one big thing to note that's really in here, and I think David was talking about it too, where over time the definition of design is expanding. I mean, if you just take this chart that shows what design work is, you know, just designing a product, which really was design not so long ago, just designing a beautiful functional thing is hard, right? And making that into like a really great, delightful experience within this really complex system, which is sort of what design has become, is also hard. And then it's even harder to kind of think about like all the implications that are going to happen, everything that this enables, particularly when they're like not on the brief, like when they're outside what you're hired for, really, like when we get down to it. And so I think the thing to say is like, we all have to be aware of this. And I think it's incredibly important to be thinking this way. And it's hard, and we need to support each other in doing it. And we need to go through the effort of doing it So just despite the fact that it's hard, it's also super positive. Like I'd much rather be around during the time when we're thinking about where this is going, rather than being influencing the time where we're not. So it's both positive and hard at the same time. I just want to acknowledge that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Scott. And one of the things I feel so lucky about our work is that we get to practice. I mean, I think there's a big thing going on here where we expect people to know or to be masters at doing this without the space to practice, because the stakes are high and the uncertainty is high. And I think your appreciation for the fact that any one of these is difficult, and now we are being asked to be open up our aperture, to be talking to our colleagues. Hey, what are you working on? Did you think about it in this way? And to embrace some of the design abilities around learning from others and around being curious and experimenting before, it really gets out there. All right, I want to talk a little bit. I have to ask, right? I have to ask. So the title of the chapter is Mischievous Materials, right? Which I think honestly, like half the people signed up, they're like, "What? Wow, I've never heard it framed this way," right? Mischievous materials in the context of emerging tech. So I want to dig into that a little bit. And Chris, I'm really curious to hear more about the framing and how you came up with this and why you decided to call it that.
All right, well, let's start by saying, like, let's think about things that aren't mischievous first. All right, so let's think about wood as a material, okay? So this is something like wood, you can feel it, right? You can hold it in your hands. We all kind of, even if you're not a construction worker or a barn raiser here, right? Like you have a sense for how wood works, right? What it can do. You know, right? That like you can affix it to itself or to other materials in certain ways. You just like you can hold it in your hands, so you have a sense for like the things it affords, right? The things that you can do with it, right? And at the same time, like you in the same way, you can build a house or whatever out of wood. Like if that house fell over, like if the wood failed, right, we would know. Okay, so that's like a lot of our materials that we are surrounded with. That's how they behave. Like another example is as simple as paper, right? Like you can hold a piece of paper in your hands. You can crunch it. You can twist it. You can throw it across the room and have a sense for like, wow, I folded it this way and it took this kind of trajectory, and I folded it this way and it, right down in front of me, right? So like paper is another one of those materials. Like also like if you slip and you get a paper cut, like it hurts. Like you have a sense for what it can do. Like that, this is like a very non-mischievous material. And a lot of us, whether or not you call yourself a designer, like we know how to work with these types of materials. However, like when we're just showing in that design framework, right? Technologies, in particular, things that are invisible, for lack of a better word, that are embedded into the products that we use that we may or may not know are there. These are things like algorithms, things like blockchains, things like DNA, synthetic biology. These are all materials of making today, right? Because when I'm coding up that new app and I'm embedding algorithms in it to recognize different faces and connect people to each other, right? Like that technology, that algorithm that I'm using, that's the material of making. And that material of making is mischievous, meaning that we don't always know what it's going to do. We don't know how it's going to behave. And how it behaves in one instance is very different than how it behaves at scale, right? And it changes. These things change with time. They morph, they twist. And, we call them mischievous because they don't, they never follow one set path. They might go off and do their own thing over here and scale like crazily over there. I mean, like you can't look at an app on your phone and most of us don't know all the algorithms that make it work. You don't know if a crop or a ear of corn that you get at the store has been genetically modified from one that may be sitting right next to it. Like we don't know that from looking at it, right? So we don't know how these materials, you know, we don't even know what they are, let alone how they work. But we also, like, most importantly, we don't know what they can do. And that's the thing that we need to learn, right? We need to learn how to use mischievous materials, because, like, in the same way that, like, it would be such a miss if you were going to build a home and you didn't know that wood was a possibility, right? It would be such a miss if we try to design the future and don't have basic understanding of the materials, the technologies that are at hand and possible.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, and I think even earlier we were talking about with these non-mischievous materials, the feedback is so apparent, right? The wood didn't work, the paper airplane fell. And what you're saying here that is so powerful is that they shift over time because of the very nature of the material. And Scott, I know you've been thinking a lot about how to even conceptualize this notion of how it changes shape over time.
Yeah, I mean, I think even just giving it the label mischievous, I think suggests, Carissa came up with that. And I was super excited about it because it just kind of talks about how they have their own agency in a way. They're changing as they go. A lot of times people really don't know how it's happening. I mean, there's a thread of AI research that's looking at what did we just do and how does that work? That's like a thread of research, right? So they also have this opacity, right? We can't really see into them. And I think, the language becomes really important because not because of the language itself, but like the metaphor that you use really shapes how you approach something. And I think for a long time, what you get with, the older materials like wood or physical products that we've been doing is we apply the old metaphor to the new thing. And that actually is like a little bit of trouble. You're kind of doomed to do it because there's nothing else to draw from. You can only draw from the language that you have, right? But when you have the old language, it kind of gets you stuck in that old way of thinking. So in this case, the prevailing metaphor for working with technology, it comes from physical products, right? So you have words like, this is a product, which suggests it's finished, and we're going to ship it, which suggests like it's going to leave and we're done with it and somebody else is going to have it. You talk about releases, which say like, we're letting it go, we're sending it out into the world. And I think if you use the old metaphor, you're kind of stuck in that thinking. So one way to twist it is just to kind of, you still have to use old metaphors, but you can use metaphors from elsewhere, right? Like grab a novel metaphor that we haven't been using yet. So, when we were thinking about this, we were throwing around things like, well, what if working with these materials is more like child rearing, right? Like if you think about it that way, if you think about it as something you have to raise and something that you have to develop, you're not going to just send it to someone's house. You're not going to take your kid at age 1 and like send them over to the neighbors and like give it to them and you're done, right? That's not good for anybody. So you start to like have to think about it in a different way, meaning, probably it's going to take some time to get this to the place where it's ready to go out in the world. Like a kid goes all the way through high school before they're really on their own. There's going to be some nurturing involved. There's like some seeing what it does and then some kind of helping it. And I'm talking about my kids if they're an it, but if we're talking about the materials, there's some like putting it out into the world, seeing how it reacts, doing that in a safe way so that you can help them adjust and be ready for situations down the road. So I think one of the ways to approach this, and it's no answer, right? Just being aware isn't a solution, but just to like try on new metaphors for the things that we're pushing out into the world and see if they help us think about it in a different way. I just think it's important to really be able to try and figure out the scope of what might happen.
And even that pushing to think differently about it opens up our imagination. I mean, it challenges some core assumptions that we know. And let's face it, our brains are wired to hold on to the thing that's known, right? And so much of this is actually about igniting imagination in different ways so that we're all talking about it, in the same way that represents opportunity and possibility. And so I really, really appreciate you pushing on that. And I think awareness is critical, and we're seeing some of that in the chat reflection, and also literacy. I mean, building on this language, you very explicitly say in the chapter, material literacy is critical. And I want to read a little quote and invite you to comment on it. You say, anyone who's not at least conversational in the language of a material can't speak and won't be heard. Their ideas and experiences won't be represented, and can't be created if they can't imagine with the material in mind. And this really speaks to something that Jim talked about earlier around reducing the gap to access, the gap to opportunity. And I think you just put it out there in such a clear way to say we really need to take this seriously. So I want to really get into that. And Chris, I know you've been working really hard to create radical access to understanding this material.
Yeah, and I think you put that well, Lisa. Like, in the same way that you might use cardboard to mock up the design of a chair that you want to make, right? We have to be able to do the same with mischievous materials, okay? And to us, that means that you don't need to know the code. This is very important. You don't have to be the coder, the technologist, but you absolutely need to know what that code can do. You have to know the effect that it can have. And this has been a key driving force in a lot of work that we've been doing. And the point that goes hand in hand with this is around the lens of who has access to that knowledge, right? I see some questions and comments going on in the chat talking about who has access to public education system, right? Like, absolutely everybody, no matter if you consider yourself a poet or a humanist, no matter what your race or ethnicity, we all need to be able to know what that code can do, because if we want all of this technology to represent all of us, it needs to be created by all of us. So how do we do that? How do we build tools and learning experiences to make that possible? Because we know that in the same way that people end up looking like their dogs, right? Or is it the dogs looking like the people? Either way, right? You can't tell them apart. Tech ends up looking like its creator. You cannot separate yourself from the work that you put out there. So if only the technologists are building the technology, that's what the technology is going to end up looking like. So how do we get this to everybody? Like, we have some tools. I'll run through some quick examples. We've got a deck of cards that explains some key machine learning algorithms in very simple, cartoony, questiony fashion, right? It takes six basic machine learning algorithms and it makes them learnable and playable with different types of data sets. So anybody can kind of, in the analog, without having any code, say to themselves, hey, I wonder if I could combine this type of algorithm and this kind of data. What if I did that? What might happen, right? It's like a Mad Libs. I just want to like allow you to experience what that feels like in real life really quickly, okay? You may or may not be familiar with an internet meme that's maybe a little bit, a couple years back at this point. And the idea is it's called hot dogs or legs, okay? And so we use this like to help people understand what a classification algorithm is, okay? You might be like, what, a classification algorithm? But this is it, this is hot dogs or legs. So all I want you to do, you can write it in the chat if you want, or just think it to yourself. Is this a picture of hot dogs or legs? Right, and you, like most of you are probably thinking hot dogs at this point, right? Because you can see, and if I ask why, you can see like you can see like the casing kind of crumpled at the top. You can kind of see the creases, they're in a little package together. All right, we know that. What about this one? Like, okay, so we might think legs here. Some of the reasons you might be thinking are, you see a shadow, you see the context that these legs are at the beach. Maybe you notice hair follicles or the shape of a knee. Yep, context of the towel on the chair. Now, what about this one? This one, usually we start to see people get more polarized. Some people are adamant this is hot dogs. Others are adamant it's legs. And again, you're looking at context. There's a towel here, but do we see hair follicles? I don't know. Right, and so the trouble you're having in identifying this, like, that's the same thing that the algorithm's doing. It's like, what information do I have to put this in one bucket or another bucket? What about that one? You might say, oh, there's like water here. I can see the hair. Well, I don't know. Like, maybe somebody's trying to play a joke on us. I don't know. What about this? Right? We know that there's a joke here. but there's also like a clear knee cut out at the top. So if you're the algorithm trying to decide, like, do you prioritize that knee? It's at the beach, right? Does the algorithm get the humor? And what about this, right? So like, again, like, we know that hairy legs, you know, isn't a hot dog. But if you're an algorithm and if you've only ever seen, you know, hot dogs without hair, but you've also seen hot dogs with ketchup and mustard, like, which one are you going to prioritize? Right? Again, like, they don't get the joke. So that's like what a classification algorithm is doing, and also some of the trouble that it has. Right. And so like, that's how you get a sense to feel and quickly learn, like, well, if I'm going to use this kind of algorithm to classify pictures of people or scenes, or like if I want to use it with a certain kind of data set, you can start to understand some of the troubles it may have or what it might be good for. So you could like say, I wonder if we could use what kind of algorithm. Maybe it's regression, and what kind of data, ticketing data, like from a police officer giving tickets in a city. And like, if I could use those two together, could I create something like to be able to predict where police might be stationed throughout a city, right? And I'm not expecting you to know this. We haven't like tried every algorithm on, but it's as simple as like a Mad Libs filling in is one way that we can start to understand some of these mischievous materials and how they actually work. And also, like we talked in the beginning about prototyping positive and negative consequences of our work, you could think about a terrifying example. What if we used a clustering algorithm and social media feed data to reveal someone's sexuality to their family before they're ready, right? So you get students, you get anyone able to think about like what could happen versus, you know, realizing it years in the future.
I think it's so powerful, Krissa, and you and I had an opportunity even last year to go into an all-girls middle and high school and to work with them on these cards. And there was something so cool after they designed the best amusement park experience they could imagine by imagining the use of different data sets with algorithms, and to hear an 11-year-old grab the mic and say, it would be great if the classification could give me my perfect hot dog. And, you know, and just that's agency. I mean, that's this notion of really, you know, meeting them where they can understand and allowing them to use their imagination and to flex those different types of disciplines, really, to think through the possibilities and you know, as you said, the terrifying elements. So I want to talk a little bit, we're running a little short on time, but I want to make sure we talk about, I mean, you did the hot dogs and legs, fun meme, those are individuals, like at scale, you know, like what happens at scale. And Scott, I want to bring you in here to talk about like how the shape changes and what that means and why it's so important to really flex that imagination.
Yeah, I mean, I think if to the point of thinking about what's to come and understanding the technology that you're working with, that's critical because of this idea that everything leaves a wake, right? So anything we make becomes the foundation for the next thing we make. If you can flip, I just want to just talk very briefly about one thing. This is a mini mall, strip mall in Culver City. And the funny thing about these is they aren't designed by anyone. No one takes credit for designing these. The credit goes to the company that built it. And it makes sense because this wasn't really designed by anybody. This is like a knee-jerk reaction to the automobile, right? And we know cities kind of develop around the way people commute. So you've got these like old cities of horse-drawn carriages have, and walking on foot have these little alleys. You know, trains come into the turn of the century, the past century, and you've got, you know, hub and spoke models. Then we get the car and you get stuff like this. And even right now, like, how are we commuting? We're commuting on Zoom, right? Like, what's a Zoom commute city going to look like? I think, you know, there's some evidence already, like rental prices are going down in the cities. They're going up in the kind of nearby suburbs. Like, we may end up with kind of like a string of suburbs with like an Amazon distribution hub next to it. Like, who knows? And I think it's just important to consider this stuff as you go forward, because you don't actually know what's going to happen until it scales, right? The cars, as an example, one car is a convenience. Millions over decades is climate change, and even just like the human brain, like one neuron is nothing. It's a throwaway. 100 billion is the human brain, right? So you have no idea what's going to happen until it scales. And I think we're seeing that now, like one kind of YouTube rabbit hole into a conspiracy theory is a wasted evening, but millions of them is a stalled election, right? And it's not to say that we can predict it or any given person's responsible for it, but it's really important to think about what it is that we're creating and how things are going to react when they get big, because it's going to be a lot different than when they're small.
Yeah, I mean, it's so, wow, it's a powerful way to describe it. And I think, again, it suggests we need to have different kinds of conversations. We need to push our thinking on it, particularly when we're bringing something new to the world. And again, I just want to bring in a quote from your chapter where you say, our new mischievous materials, AI, biology, and distributed public ledgers continue to morph after they are made or molded. We've entered an era where it's truly impossible to predict the impact of our creations because they change us as fast as we make them. So the future is not knowable, but that doesn't mean that we can absolve responsibility for it, right? That we really are now seeing, because the evidence and because of where we are living right now, that we can't let it be to chance, that we have to step up and take responsibility, not just for building it, but ahead of time. Imagine, just push ourselves to imagine a range of possible futures here. To look beyond the observable events and to really think about the patterns and the trends. One of the things we're building out is classes around anticipatory intelligence. How do we really learn to take a look at something that's observable and have the instinct to then go to the second and third order consequences? As someone that's been working in futures for a long time, there are tools. I mean, the good news is, right, this is good. There are practices we can embrace. And one of the ones that we use in different formats in our classes is called the futures wheel. And we see here that, building off of, Scott, your example of cars, just one example that all of us can do. All of us can take something that's knowable today and really just start to ask ourselves, what's the next implication? So for example, if we look at driverless cars, we could see, well, one implication is accidents go down, therefore fatalities go down, then available organs go down, and boom, maybe there's a new market for it. We could also see perhaps that, auto repair shops go down, and we're seeing this right now with COVID and the implications of lots of different retail that was based around that is going away. If accidents also go down, we have the insurance that will be very, very different, second car ownership. So lots and lots of things that we can go on and on, that just taking from this observable instance and say, what could happen next, and what could happen next, and what could happen next. That is something we could all start doing right now. And I think we need to build that into our ways of looking at technology, not just to be enamored about it, but to say, what could happen next. Well, we are nearing our time together, and I want to make sure that we end with some examples of where we're going next. This is really the beginning of our conversation with all of you, this larger community, to share some of the work we've been doing around design, future of design, related to technology and related to amplifying the agency and access for us all to be able to really participate in shaping the future that we want to bring to life. So I really just want to end by sharing some what you can be looking forward to in the coming year. And Scott, maybe I'll turn it to you to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing. Oh, here we go. Actually, we're going to talk about Carissa's work in this fabulous, exciting new initiative called REP.
Yeah, I'll just share one of a few projects I'm really excited about is called REP. It is a workbook type magazine that I am working on with a handful of my colleagues, Megan Steyer, and our colleagues, Ariam Mogos and Laura McBain, in addition to Lisa, and a broad network of external collaborators, which is really a magazine aimed at folks that are 8th grade and above, that is full of analog experiences, learning experiences to help understand a whole range of different emerging technologies. So REP stands for reputation, it stands for represent, it stands for repair, of a lot of the systems that we have in the world. So this is really about promoting equity in technology education for everyone. And so this will be coming soon in 2021. The first issue is on voice bots. So those things like Siri and Google Home, Alexa. The second one is on synthetic biology, so building with DNA. The third one is a game building with machine learning. We have things about designing with DNA, and it goes on and on and on. So we're really excited about that.
Great.
And then, oh yeah, sorry. Also in next year, we have a bunch of books coming out. We've been working on some publishing. And the thing I would just call out that relates to this is we've seen a real shift just in writing them, that we're kind of moving from just unlocking creativity to helping people navigate these, terrifically unknowable problems. And so this is the slate of a few of the books that are coming out, which is Navigating Ambiguity, Drawing on Courage in the Secret Language of Maps. But like each one of them has to do with like, what are the techniques and tools and mindsets you can use to kind of figure out what to do when the possibilities are not totally clear, which it feels like that's where we're going these days.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, that really relates to the final point you make in the chapter and where we're going to end. And I just want to read out this final quote where you say, "We are the technology we should be most concerned about. The rate of change has finally surpassed our ability to understand what is really afoot. For better or worse, we're also the operating system everything else runs on." So REP and those books are really about upgrading our operating system, right? To be able to step in and make sure that humans stay at the center of the choices that we make, and that responsibility around making choices is available to all of us. So with that, I just want to thank you again, Scott, Carissa, David, Jim, the Common Sense Media team, our amazing colleagues at the D.school. Huge shout out to Ariel Raz, who is the mastermind behind the scenes to make all the technology flow. And finally, thank all of you. Big thanks to all of you for joining us for this last moments in our webinar. We are going to send out an email with links to a lot of these resources, the I Love algorithm cards and some other things coming up. So we're so grateful that you joined us today, and please join us for what's ahead. We have a lot more coming, including our K-12 lab kicking off a Futures Fest in late January. So you're going to want to go to the D-School and check out the news and events page frequently, because our work is made so much better by your contribution where we are learning together. So thank you so much, everyone, and all the best for a healthy end of your year.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Lisa.
Lisa, you're the best. Thanks, Lisa.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.